I'm Stephanie. I'm back with my weekly meal planning shenanigans as a busy mom who really doesn't enjoy cooking. I like to share simple meals that are easy to cook, you're able to get in and out of the kitchen and move on with your life. But I'm kind of in a meal planning dilemma right now because we have been burning through our favorite crock pot and casserole recipes during this really busy season for our family. And so I need a new recipe. But if you don't enjoy cooking, you probably know finding new recipes can be a challenge. I know I'm not super motivated to try new recipes because I've got picky eaters in my family. I have people with sensitive stomachs. And I don't know about you, but money's not growing on trees right now. And so I am very cautious in the ingredients that we use so that we are not, creating food waste. And when you try a new recipe, sometimes it's not a hit and people don't eat the leftovers and that food goes to waste. So that's also a reason why I am not just running around trying new recipes all of the time. But desperate times call for desperate measures. I have my trusty cookbooks, especially my favorite crockpot cookbooks. And I have identified 2 new recipes that we're going to try. One is a casserole and one goes in the crock pot. I just went to Costco and Winco. I'll link that video if you haven't watched it. And we spent a ridiculous amount of money stocking up for a month or more of just staples to keep in the cupboards. I really don't need a lot of groceries, but I am gonna head to Walmart after dinner tonight. It's been a long time since our family has set foot in a restaurant. We are gonna go out to dinner tonight to celebrate some really good news that our family got. But after we go to dinner, I'm just gonna run over to Walmart and grab those last few things that our family needs. And then I will show you our, hopefully, mini grocery haul. And then I will take you through a week of recipes with the goal to try one new recipe. All right, well, things got a little out of hand tonight. We went out to dinner and had 2 cars, and I was expecting to take my car by myself to the store after dinner, and then everyone decided they wanted to come. This is kind of the stock up on personal care items that people are gonna need for the next month or so, and so I probably don't need to go through all of this. And then they had a bunch of t-shirts on clearance for $1. So the girls picked out a couple each. And then we were able to get to the grocery section. I needed rice. We got some more of these turkey sausage sticks. I've had another kid discover that they like them too, and so we're going through them a little more quickly. So I grabbed 2 packages. The new recipe I'm gonna try this week is a crockpot lasagna, and so I got the lasagna noodles for that. I've discovered that they don't carry this at all stores, and so I'm really grateful that they carry it at our Walmart. So every time I go, if they have restocked, I always grab a couple of jars, and we use it all the time. So I grabbed a couple of those. I had a kid craving instant mashed potatoes, so those ended up in the cart. We have a jar with these little mixes, and it was running low, so we just grabbed a couple of those to throw in the jar. I was running low on flour. I had a kiddo request these for a snack. These are for a breakfast that I'm making for some high schoolers next week, and so I brought just some individual apple juices for that. These got put in the cart by a family member. We have the usual milk. So this just always strikes me as funny that, we have Lactaid, but then here's some ice cream right next to it. And our mozzarella cheese, cottage cheese for the lasagna. I prefer ricotta cheese, but they said the cottage cheese was better for the crockpot lasagna, so I got that. We were out of string cheese. Speaking of that breakfast for the high schoolers, it's going to include strawberries, and I was really nervous that the berries that I bought yesterday would go bad too fast, so I just grabbed some that looked really fresh. And then I got a salad mix to go with one of our dinners next week, some spinach, some iceberg lettuce, and a watermelon. So I think that's everything. The grand total hurts my heart to even say. I'm actually gonna go to Ibotta and see if any of these, Old Spice often has Ibotta rebates, so I'm gonna go look for some of those. But anyway, it was right around $250 for everything. So this section took the most of the money. But yeah, that is everything. So now it's time to show you what I make with our groceries combined with that big haul from Winco and Costco. Tonight we're having Marry Me chicken, and like I've said before, Sundays are kind of the day where I am more open to having recipes that have a few more steps. And so this is actually a vegan recipe that I've adapted now that I'm no longer eating a vegan diet. And so the first thing I do, very first thing, is I get some raw cashews soaking in boiling water because that is going to be a cream later on. As you can probably guess from my use of cashew cream, that we really do use this vegan recipe as written. The only change is that we substitute chicken for the chickpeas. You could totally cook the chicken breasts whole. I just always use cubed chicken breasts out of the freezer, and so I just chopped them up out of habit. So while this is cooking, I am just going to chop a bunch of spinach for use later in the recipe. And then it also calls for basil. It said like 4 to 5 basil leaves, but the leaves on my little plant that I got from Winco are really small. So I just kind of eyeballed it to what I thought would be a good amount of fresh basil to use as a garnish. For the cashew cream, once everything has soaked, I pour off the soaking liquid and put in a fresh cup of water and then blend it, and it's ready to use in the recipe later on. So now I'm ready to turn my attention to the chicken, and once it's cooked, I just add half a cup of chopped sun-dried tomatoes and just let that simmer for a minute. And then I add about a tablespoon of tomato paste and then 1 cup of vegetable broth. And you'll see I just kind of push everything off to the side of the pan and I mix it together so I don't have like big globs of tomato paste in my chicken. After incorporating those other ingredients, I add in the cashew cream, and I didn't measure it. You're only supposed to use a cup of it, but I think there's always a little bit more than a cup, and I went ahead and just added it in. It's a little bit thin, but it will thicken up as it simmers. So I go ahead and just add the spinach at this point. The basil goes in just at the very end. So just the spinach, and I let that just kind of simmer, reduce, let the spinach get wilted. So while I'm doing that, I just make a really quick salad to go with dinner. So once everything looks the way I would like it to, I add in the basil, give it a good stir, and then dinner is ready. We serve it with naan, and we also do tortillas because I didn't have a lot of naan in the freezer. So this was our meal on Sunday. For Monday night's dinner, I'm making a chicken and broccoli pesto pasta, and I don't know, this chicken is just staring me down in the fridge. So I'm trying to work my way through it and then get some of it put in the freezer. But again, I'm just used to using the chunks of chicken that I've already frozen, and so I chop a couple more chicken breasts to use in this recipe as well. As the chicken was cooking, I also cooked pasta. And then at the very end of the pasta cooking, you just add broccoli to the top of the pot and put the lid on. I had a very sad amount of broccoli in my fridge, but it'll work. So then once that's done, this is very kind of similar to the recipe from last night. I just kind of push the chicken off to the side and I start making the sauce in the pan. And so this one is some chicken broth, and then I use cream cheese, and I am doubling the sauce because the pasta I'm using is different. I normally use bow tie pasta, but I'm using a different kind that is clearly going to use a lot of sauce. So I just doubled the sauce recipe, and you just kind of try and convince the cream cheese that it wants to be smooth. And so that's what I'm doing here. And then once that is looking pretty good, I add in the pesto and give that a good stir. And then I mix it up with the cooked and drained pasta. And this is what it looks like. And so the kids were telling me this would make a great meal for St. Patrick's Day because I just served it with a Caesar salad kit and dinner was great. So tonight we are doing Taco Tuesday. I'm probably not going to show you much of that because it's pretty self-explanatory, but we are running low on our taco seasoning. So I've mentioned in previous videos that one of our family members is very sensitive to garlic powder. And so that is something that I have tried to eliminate in my cooking. And so taco seasoning is one thing that I now make myself, and I have to use just like a different chili powder, and I'm running low on that tonight. And so pretty much I normally make at least half of a jar or more when I pull out all the stuff to make the taco seasoning, but the amount of chili powder I had left kind of dictated how much I was able to make. And so I'll link the recipe that I actually use down below, and my family doesn't mind it at all. They don't really miss the garlic powder. So once I have it all mixed, then I can just use it as I would any other taco seasoning. I have found that I don't need to use quite as much, and so I use 2 to 3 tablespoons depending on how much meat I have, and I always do mix in refried beans with our meat as well. So that's why it looks the way it does. So once I've added the seasoning, I just add some water and let it simmer like usual. So this was our spread for taco night. I just served it with a bowl of fruit. And I always typically eat my tacos as a salad. So that was my plate. So on Wednesday, we had a busy day, and we actually had way more leftover taco meat than I realized. And so we kind of did a choose your own adventure. I whipped up a few pancakes for anyone who was interested, and the rest of us just kind of used up the last of the taco trimmings. Mine ended up being a giant salad. And so you have probably seen me make meatloaf before. Today I'm going to show you how I form it into meatballs. And so it's the same process. I just get 2 pounds of ground beef, and then I add in 1 cup of oats and the equivalent of 1 envelope of dry onion soup mix. And I try to prolong the inevitable. I use a spatula as much as I can until I finally have to dig in with my hands. But once that's kind of mixed together, I add 1 cup of milk. And again, try to mix it with a spatula, but eventually I have to give up and mix it up with my hands. And so I thought I would just show you that it really doesn't take that long to make homemade meatballs. Yes, it's time lapse, but 5 minutes. That's all it took to form these meatballs. I use an ice cream scoop, and I just kind of push it against the side of the bowl, so I don't have to roll up the meatballs. I just kind of use that pressure to form them, and then I just kind of push them on the top of the ice cream scoop, and then put them in the pan. And so I timed myself because I was curious. As someone who doesn't love cooking, this process always seems to take forever, but in reality, it was 5 minutes. So here are the meatballs. They are going in the pan and going in the oven. After draining the fat from the meatballs, I normally just put them back in the pan with some sauce and then just put it in the oven to kind of warm up. But because this was a really busy night for our family, I just put them in the crock pot with the sauce, and I just put it on low to simmer until everybody kind of got home, and then as everyone trickled in, they made their sandwiches. Well, it took me all week, but I'm finally ready to try a new recipe. I'm doing an unstuffed pepper casserole, and so the first thing I do is get the rice going in the Instant Pot, because I feel like that is always the thing that I'm waiting on. And then once I have that going, I just start chopping up veggies. This recipe called for 2 bell peppers, but for our family, 1 was definitely sufficient, so I got that chopped up. And then it also called for an onion, and I felt like that was a decent ratio of onion to pepper. I had Italian sausage in the freezer, so I got that cooking with the onion. And while that was cooking, I started on just the other ingredients, like the sauce type of ingredients that I'm going to be adding later. And so that is a can of tomatoes and some tomato paste. And I just kind of gave that a good mix. Then added some Italian seasoning. And then because anytime I feel like I'm using a lot of canned tomato product, I do add just a little bit of sugar. And then I added some Worcestershire sauce, and I did a tablespoon and it just didn't feel like it was going to be enough, so then I did another little squirt. And then I added some salt and pepper, and it was ready to go. If you look up this recipe, you're going to notice that it calls for beef broth and that you create the casserole with uncooked rice. And I just don't have the patience for that. Whenever I try to do a casserole with uncooked rice, I just hate babysitting it to make sure that it's the right consistency. And so I skipped that whole thing and just made I made my rice first. And then I just added the cooked rice to my sausage mixture and then put it in a pan for the oven. So you can definitely do it the way it was written, but for me, this was just a shortcut, especially for a new recipe. I just didn't want to have to babysit it in the oven. So I put it in the casserole pan and added some cheese to the top and just let it get melty and yummy. And we just served it with fresh fruit and vegetables. While it did take me all week, I did meet my goal of trying at least one new recipe. I would have loved to try the crock-pot lasagna, but we had that night where we had extra food and I didn't want that to go to waste. So we will use those ingredients for the crock-pot lasagna, but for now, one new recipe was good enough for this week. But thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to continue to follow along with my meal planning shenanigans, hit that subscribe button and I will see you next time.